1 Kings chapter 11 is where we're at. I looked at this chapter this past week and realized this is a long one, so I'm going to divide this up into two distinct sections. But as has already been said, we have holidays coming up, and we have Thanksgiving here, but all of a sudden this week we're going to be jumping into the Christmas season. So as a way of reminder, I'm going to share with you what this next month's going to be like. It's called the 12 Crazy Days of Christmas. So take a look. That's what we have to expect the next month. Are you guys excited? Yeah. Awesome. It's so easy this time of year to get distracted as to why we celebrate these holidays. And And I'll tell you, it's getting busy. Busy, busy, busy. We're running around everywhere. When I look at the Bible, the word anxiety in the Greek, it literally means to be pulled in different directions. So think about that. Pull this way, pull that way. Literally, Jesus says, do not be anxious about your life. Don't allow your mind and your hearts and your lives to be pulled in so many different directions. And when that happens, when we are anxious, when we're pulled around, it's at that point that we find ourselves the most prone to failure and to breaking. And that's the biblical definition of what anxiety is all about. Being tossed and stretched and pulled in so many different ways. And let me tell you, this is what we're studying right here in 1 Kings chapter 11. And this is the source of one of Solomon's downfall. So what we're going to take a look at, if you're following in your Bible, 1 Kings chapter 11, and we're going to take some lessons from Solomon's downfall. Now, up until this point, Solomon has been pretty prosperous. Has built the temple, has had lands built upon, has prosperous cities and wealth, and at this point in Israel's history, the kingdom will never again be bigger than it is right now. Well, something happens at the height of Solomon's kingdom, and some things lent to his ultimate downfall and to his ultimate destruction as a king. And so if you're following along, 1 Kings chapter 11, and we're going to begin reading right here in verse 1 and then through 3. And we're going to try to get to verse 13 today. But take a look what lent to Solomon's downfall. Chapter 11, verse 1. It says, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women, besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. These were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. And he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. So let's take a look. A couple of things that Solomon, what led to his downfall. Number one is that Solomon's captivation led to distraction. His captivation with these women, with power, with lust, with authority, led to his distraction from what God supremely intended for him and for his kingdom. There's no other aspect of Solomon's life that gets more ridicule than the fact that he had so many wives. So right there it says he had 700 wives of royal birth. So ones that had claims to land, had a royal heritage, and then 300 secondary wives or concubines. No other aspect of his life gets more ridiculous. Take, for example, Solomon's bathroom. You got his, you have schedule for Solomon, anniversaries, Zadok on there. You also have this one. Although Solomon was the wisest man on earth, he could not figure an easy solution for having hundreds of mothers-in-law. A man once challenged Mark Twain to quote some passage from the scriptures forbidding polygamy. Certainly, replied the humorist, no man can serve two masters. This is what happens. Your interests get divided. You know, what happens in the downfall of Solomon is that the way that you assume, like for example, Satan, the way that he assumes power and authority over somebody's life is it's the same politically as it is militarily or spiritually. He comes into your life and he divides your interests, and then he conquers. Divide and conquer. Satan used Solomon's weakness. That was his lust for power, lust for women, lust for authority. He got him distracted. And that's what led to his ultimate destruction. If Satan can get you distracted, then he can destroy you. If he can get you distracted from what your intention and your purpose is in this life, then he can destroy you. I find that in the universal church today, when the church is focused on unimportant things, something small, they get distracted from the purpose of going into all the world and making disciples. The church can easily get divided and distracted, and ultimately it can get destroyed. What I see happening in homes today is that a family may get a fixation on one singular thing. A wrong happens, an offense happens, and if Satan can get the family distracted from their purpose of loving one another and serving one another for the purpose of following God, if he can distract you from that, then he can destroy the family. You see why Jesus placed so much emphasis throughout the New Testament on do not worry, do not be anxious. You know that phrase, like we said at the beginning, that word anxious literally means to be pulled in different directions. And because one of Satan's primary tactics in order to get to us as believers is if he can distract us and pull us in all different kinds of directions, then he knows he can destroy us. Divide and conquer. And let me tell you, I'm the worst offender of all those things. Because it's so easy for us to get pulled in so many different directions. We are so busy all the time. Even our kids. It's crazy. All the things we have in our lives. It says in the last days that in Nahum chapter 2 verses 3 through 4 says the chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of Messiah's preparation. Before the Lord returns, it says that the chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle against one another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings. That was Nahum several thousands of years before there were ever cars. He said, people are just going to be running like mad, like lightning. Same thing is expressed by Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4. It says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Does it say anything about relationships or love for God? No, it says that love shall grow cold in the last days. Yeah, we're running to and fro. Knowledge is increased. We got internet. We got so much information, but knowledge puffs up. But love builds up. Got lots of knowledge, not so much love, not much relationship. Henry Ford once said, a weakness of all human beings is trying to do too many things at once. I'm the worst offender of all of them. That scatters effort, destroys direction, it makes for haste, and haste makes waste. So we do things all the wrong ways possible before we come to the right one. Then we think it is the best way because it works, and it was the only way left that we could see. And every now and then I wake up in the morning, headed toward that finality with a dozen things I want to do. I know I can't do them all at once. When asked what he did about that, Ford replied, I go out and I trot around the house. While I'm running off the excess energy that wants to do too much, my mind clears and I see what can be done and should be done first. Trying to find that focus. What is most important? What is our priority during the week, during the day? What should be done? I think a good illustration of this, I think I've used this before, gives us a good priority for what our lives should be on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, throughout this month, when we're going to be so busy. A professor stood before his class with some items in front of him. And when the class began, he picked up a large empty jar, proceeded to fill it with rocks about 2 inches in diameter. Then he asked the students if the jar was full, and they agreed, yeah, it was full. So the professor then picked up a box of pebbles, poured them into the jar, and he shook the jar lightly and watched as the pebbles rolled into the open areas between the rocks. The professor then asked the students again if the jar was full. They chuckled and agreed that it was indeed full this time. The professor picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. The sand filled the remaining open areas of the jar. Now, said the professor, I want you to recognize that this jar signifies your life. The rocks are the truly important things, such as family, health, and relationships. God. If all else was lost and only the rocks remained, your life would be meaningful. The pebbles are the other things that matter in your life, such as work or school. And the sand signifies the remaining small stuff and material possessions. If you put sand into the jar first, there's no room for the rocks or the pebbles. The same can be applied to your lives. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, you'll never have room for the things that are truly important. There will always be time to go to work, clean the house, or fix the disposal. Take care of the big rocks first, things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just pebbles and sand. You know what the big rocks are? It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. That's the big rock we should put into our jar. Our priority to seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And let me tell you, after that, it all works out. It says the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. All these other things shall be added unto you as well. When we have the intention and the focus of our life to love Him with everything that we have, everything that we are, everything else falls into place. Because Solomon was divided in his interests, and because he was distracted from this pure intention of following the Lord and honoring Him with his heart, his life, his soul, all of his strength, Satan divided his life, distracted him, pulled him in different directions, and he was, because of his captivation with his wives, he was led to distraction, which ultimately, number two, which led to compromise, coming in a slow progression. Came to compromise in coming in slow progression. Look at what happens to him. To go from this amazing prayer that he had back in chapters 8 and 9 and following the Lord, and all of a sudden to get to this. Look at what happens here. Verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, or Milcom, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. Look at all the way to verse 9. On the hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, and the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Look at what it says right there in verse 9. The Lord himself appeared to Solomon twice. You think that would have shaken your life. Imagine that. God appears to you twice. But yet, look at the way that it starts out, his life, intimate relationship with God, could talk with him. And then all of a sudden, he's building high places to all these gods. Look at who these gods are. First of all, you have Ashtoreth. Okay, Ashtoreth is interpreted as a female demon of lust. In demonology, Ashtoreth is connected to actually the day of Friday, and visually represented as a young woman, and often with a cow's horns on her head, and sometimes with a cow's tail. She was associated with fertility, and for with the cow's horns, with their livelihood, with livestock. You also had Milcom, or Molech, and these words are used interchangeably all throughout history, these names for this false god. This was conceived under the form of a calf or an ox, depicted as a man with the head of a bull. Now, this was the most detestable god back in the Old Testament. Many pagan nations felt that fire was necessary to cleanse from sin, since they were worshippers of the sun god, and power on earth was represented by fire. And this was evidenced in as young infants were made human sacrifices and burned in the arms of the idol. So they would take their firstborn children, this Molech would be placed there would be a fire placed within its belly, these arms would get flaming red hot, and then they would take their firstborn children and just place the child up on top of these arms. God forbid this worship in 2 Kings 23:10 and Leviticus 18:21. So they were sacrificing their children in order that they could be free and prosperous in their nation. Now, we may say, man, that's horrible, but let me tell you, we're still doing it today. We're still sacrificing our children to Molech. We have had 40 to 50 million children sacrificed to Molech because we're thinking, oh, if only we sacrifice this child, then we could be free and prosperous, and I don't want to have to deal with this child anymore. We're still killing our children. You also had Chemosh. This last one, this name meant destroyer, the subduer, or he was the fish god. Now, all of these gods, I want you to take a note, Ashtoreth, Milcom, Molech, and Chemosh, all of these gods had to do with one's livelihood. Okay? You have the depiction of cattle, you have the depiction of fish, you have the depiction of fertility, plus you have the depiction of cattle right here. This all had to do with one's livelihood. So this was all about money, it was all about prosperity. So I want us to take a look. For example, it's interesting that money, prosperity actually has a connection, word-wise, grammatically with cattle. It's interesting right here. The actual word for money in Latin is pecunia, from pecus, or cattle, in English. Note that we still use the word fee in English. It's the cross-reference to the Old English word fea, which means cattle, property, money, which is related to German vie for cattle. The idea of using cows instead of plastic credit cards can also be found in the word capital, which comes from capita and means the head of a herd. So, interestingly, cattle, money, same thing, same principle. It always talks about that thing about money. The word, within my wallet, it says Capital One on there. That literally means the main cow. When you stop and think about it, by its denotion and by its grammar context. All of the worship had to do with one's livelihood. Now, notice what happens in the text. It says that in this worship of his livelihood, in the worship of these other gods, of his riches, of his wealth and prosperity, it says that his heart was turned away. That word turned is the Hebrew word nakah. It's a primitive root meaning to stretch or to spread out. By implication, to bend away, outstretch, prolong, simply to stretch. Now, I want us to think about this. You take, I'm not a carpenter. I don't know where, Dean's not here right now, but, you can take a big piece of wood, okay, and if you bend it, it's going to snap, it's going to break. But if you simply heat it up and steam it and over a long period of time, you can bend that and make it into different shapes. That's what's conveyed with that word nata, that his heart was slowly turned away. That his heart, if you initially, at the beginning of his rule and reign, if you tried to bend his heart towards Milcom or Ashtoreth or to Chemosh, it would have broken. He's like, no way, I wouldn't do that. But because over a little bit of time, over a little heat, over a little pressure, his heart was slowly, in the process, outstretched. And he was bent, and he was shaped into another shape, which was much different than the way that he began. It was a slow process that his heart was turned away. We have one friend back in at Frontier School of the Bible where we attended, and found out that she had left her husband, left her kids, and ran off with another woman. And so Christy and I went out to go visit her, and we're like, what happened? You're abandoning your husband, and you're doing all these changes in your life. What's going on? And she said, I just started about 4 or 5 years ago. And I just wanted to be happy. So I started making little changes in my life. She didn't wake up one morning and say, I need to leave my husband. She didn't make those drastic changes. It happened over a long period of time. It was a compromise of her thoughts. It was a compromise of her faith, of her integrity, and she didn't decide one morning, I'm going to do this. It was a process. Just like for Solomon, it didn't wake up and say, I'm going to sacrifice children, I'm going to build an altar to Milcom and to Ashtoreth and to Chemosh. No, it was a slow turning away. There's one song, it says it's a slow fade. Yeah, casting crowns. It doesn't come on instantaneously. It's like a little compromise here. It's a little giving up of this territory to Satan here. It's always a very slow thing. And that's what happened with Solomon. His wives, his fixation, his compromise with his distraction ultimately led to compromise, and it came in a slow progression, which ultimately it resulted in comfortability leading to disconnection. Take a look at the rest of the passage here, verse 10. It says, although God had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and if you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I most certainly will tear the kingdom away from you, and I'm going to give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. It says right there that he held fast to these other gods. He held fast to these wives here, and that he loved these wives. Look at once again. Verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart, and his heart was not devoted fully to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Look at verse 8 again. He did the same for all his foreign wives. He burned incense, offered sacrifices to their gods. They had turned his heart away. He held fast to them. He clung to them. He pursued them. Now, in the Greek language, how it's, we have 4 different words that are used for love. in the Greek language. You have agape, which is unconditional love. You have phileo, which is brotherly love. You also have eros, which is romantic love, and you also have storge, which is affection. In Hebrew, there's only one singular word for love, and it has to stand for all kinds of love. If I was a Hebrew, I would use the same word for love to describe my desire for chocolate cake as much as my love for my wife. The same word is used interchangeably for things as it is for people. But the object of the love shows what kind of love is being described. It says that Solomon loved 1,000 women. Is that possible in a godly sense? He was so enamored with these women and what they gave to him that he was blind to the cost. And so what I recognize his quote-unquote love to be was not love, but it was lust. Lust is known as having a desire for which there is no satisfaction. In the language of today, I think Solomon, it's quite clear as you study this passage that Solomon was a sexual addict. He was a nymphomaniac. Addiction, by its nature, is the pursuit of satisfaction through something that does not have the capacity to satisfy. If someone has to have 1,000 women in his life, it should be clear that they cannot be satisfied by their own lust. And that's what lust is. It's quenching a thirst that cannot be satisfied. I wrote here, in Solomon's case, he got what he wanted. And the women got what they wanted. So he wanted pleasure, the women got security, but there was no relationship. Solomon chose to love what could not satisfy him, and it ruined his life. He got rich, he got complacent, he got comfortable, and that was his ultimate downfall. Now, we've been using this quote all throughout our study here about how in the cycle of the nations, and this is from Alexander Fraser Tytler or Lord Woodhouse Lee, how the nations, they go through this cycle of a democracy, and once you start getting abundance, you get selfish, you get complacent, you get apathetic, you get dependent. Where Solomon is in the study is that he's become dependent upon his wives, he's become dependent upon these alliances with these foreign nations, and what results ultimately is back into bondage. So, what we see happening here is that Solomon's got real comfortable, got real complacent, and that comfortability leads to a disconnection. Got apathetic, and then back into dependence, and ultimately, as this text says, back into bondage. The nation would be falling back into that same exact cycle again. Let me tell you, we're at the same state here in the United States. We've gotten very, very comfortable and very apathetic. Let me take, for example, what has happened here in the United States. As we have become comfortable, you start seeing, by statistics, you start seeing the amount of spiritual passion just kind of diminishing. But where you start seeing nations that are persecuted, you start seeing the church growing by leaps and bounds. So when you start getting comfortable, things are good, it diminishes. When you start seeing persecution, it grows. Take, for example, in the 1920s, 65% of Americans attended church. Today, church attendance hovers under 40%. It's more like 35 right now. And that includes Roman Catholics. That also includes, different denominations, non-evangelicals. So Take a look here. Of the 300 million people in the United States, 160 million do not attend church, and the U.S. has become the third largest unchurched nation in the world. You talk about unchurched, it's right here in our backyard. In the 20th century alone, there have been some, but take for example what happens in other countries where the persecution is. You have 1.8 million martyrs in Africa, 600,000 Christians who have died in the genocidal conflicts in Rwanda and Burundi, 2 million deaths in the 17 years of Sudanese civil war waged by a militant Islamist government on the predominantly Christian population of the South, and now you have ISIS. You have persecution on a huge scale in this world, and you would think because of persecution, oh man, the church should be in decline. But what you're seeing is amazing happening in other countries. Despite this, the church has had unprecedented growth in other nations. In the 20th century, the Christian population in Africa exploded by an estimated 8 or 9 million in 1900 to some 335 million in 2000, marking a shift in the center of gravity of Christianity from the West to Latin America, parts of Asia, and Africa. By 2025, there will be 633 million Christians in Africa. Even though there's major persecution happening there, and there's martyrs happening, that's almost double our population of the United States. The center of Christianity is moving over to Africa and over to Asia today. Despite extreme persecution, there are as many as 28,000 new converts a day in communist China. There's going to be estimated 200 million Chinese Christians by the end of this year. Isn't that awesome? Where there's persecution, you start seeing the church growing. But where you see comfortability, it's in decline. The population in Iran is 70 million. Iran, that's the number one top list of persecutors of the church. The population in Iran is 70 million. 70% of the population is under 30, and we're finding that many young people are converting their families and friends after they come to Jesus. Mission experts estimate there are 20 to 30,000 indigenous evangelical and Pentecostal believers today, most of them from Muslim backgrounds. In the last 20 years, more Iranians have come to Christ compared to the last 14 centuries, with annual church growth of 7.5%. Think about that. 7.5% of the Iranian population, the worst persecutor of the church, one of the fastest growing churches in the world, with persecution on top of that. You know what the fastest growing church in the U.S. today is? It's the LDS Church. It's the Mormons, and they have a growth factor of 1.88. In a comfortable situation, the fastest growing church is 1.88, but in a persecuted situation, 7%. Since 1980, there has been essentially no growth in the proportion of the adult population that become classified as born-again Christians here in the United States. Where you find the church comfortable and things are relatively easy, you see Satan coming in and dividing and conquering, because he has us distracted. He has us pulled in different directions. But where you see persecution happen, it's like they are focused. My most important thing on this earth is to love the Lord with all my heart, my soul, all my strength. That's what's happening in other nations where you see persecution. They start realizing, what is my priority here? It's not all of these earthly things. It's Jesus and Him alone. At the risk of sounding un-American, I think one of the best things spiritually for our country is the rise of Bibles. Because that's making us turn to God. Geopolitically, economically, I don't think it's a great thing, but I think in a spiritual sense, if that is what's going to take us to turn back to Him, you know what? If it's going to turn one life around and say, we need to focus on God, so be it. If it's going to take the downturn of the economy or the difficult political situations we're finding ourselves in right now, it'll be worth it, because better is to follow God than to lose our own souls. Better to follow Him and not gain all this politically and financially, all these other things, and then have our lives forever than to surrender ourselves to what is least important. You see, what's happening in our nation today is that we've gotten so distracted, so comfortable. Same thing happened with Solomon. He got comfortable, got distracted, he got rich, he got all that he wanted, but that's not necessarily what God wanted. And next week, what we're going to find out when we dig into the rest of the chapter is that what God sent in order to get His nation's attention. What we're going to see, yeah, you have a very comfortable nation, and when that nation gets comfortable, look at what God sends along in order to get people's attention. And I fear, for our sake as Americans, I fear for us that we're headed right back into that bondage cycle again. You know, that's what happened to the Roman Empire. Got comfortable, economy got downturn of the economy, and then all of a sudden we have this political factions, and then along came the Huns. It's a cycle that repeats itself all throughout history. Let me tell you a little story. Back in 95, went to Montana Wilderness School of Bible. I told you before that my mother said you have to finish college before you get married. So that was my intention at the beginning of college, right there. Okay, focused on finishing school. I had great grades back in 95, 96. Then if you look at my report card a couple months later, I started dating Christy right at the time, right when I started dating, you could see my grades diminish. And I mean, it was great. I mean, just we had so much fun together. We were just inseparable and everything. And I went on Christmas break. You know, she had to go one way, I had to go the other. She had to do Michigan. I went over to Pennsylvania. And I remember one time I was reading in my Bible. I recall in Genesis 22, where Abraham has his son Isaac on this altar. And God says, I want you to take that one thing that I promised to you, the one thing that you love, and I want you to set him on the altar, and as an act of showing that God is the supreme desire and love of your life, I want you to put that son that you have prayed for and desired for so long, I want you to put that on the throne and on the altar, and you're going to sacrifice him. I remember reading that passage, and it was like God was telling me, Bruce, who do you got on your altar right now? Who are you trusting? Am I number one in your life, or is it something else? And I read that passage, and I'm like, God, you're not number one. You know what Christy is right now. I had built my life and put her as number one in my life, and I was realizing then and there that if I get distracted by something, yeah, it's great and it's beautiful and it's lovely to have relationships like this, but if I make that number one, that's how Satan feeds into our life, is that he divides us and then he conquers us. He distracts us, then destruction happens after that. And God was saying, Bruce, who's number one in your life? And then I realized, Lord, you know who I need to put on this altar? I need to put Christy there. Because you need to be number one in my life. And I found from then on, I even told Christy, I wrote her a letter, said, you know what, if I'm going to love you the way that you need to be loved, if I need to follow God the way that I need to put him first. And if I'm going to follow the same instruction that Abraham had, I have to put you on the altar. And let me tell you, it works a whole lot better that way. When we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, let me tell you, everything else will be added up to us as well. You see, Satan has a way of distracting us from what is most important. And so I'm going to ask you the question today. Who or what is on your altar right now? What is number one? If God is not number one, there's somebody else there that's distracting you. There's something else that's distracting you. It may be money, it may be a job, it may be a relationship, it may be anything. But God is telling you right now, are you willing to sacrifice what is most important to you for the betterment of the relationship that you have with me? Let me tell you, when you say, God, this is yours. You know what happened with Abraham? He said, when the son is yours, God provided that ram in the thicket. And when you say, God, this thing is yours, this precious thing, I love it, and it's something that you provided for me, but I'm giving it to you. Let me tell you, he gives you something even better in return. He gives you something way, way better. So what is it? What is that one thing, that one person, and you need to say, Lord, this is yours. I'm going to invite the gals to come up today, and we're going to sing a song together, old chorus, which I want us to make as a prayer of our hearts. Is God number one? Is your desire for him above all else? But I want us to pray this together. You know the words? Just sing it out to him. This is As the Deer. Just pray it out to the Lord. Here we go.
You are
God may be saying to you, my lovely son, my daughter, what is it that's on the altar right now that you're realizing right now that you need to give up to Him? And He's saying, I want you more than anything else. And I want us, in our heart's mind, let's lift those things up before the Lord. Some of you right now are realizing, maybe for the first time, I've been holding out. I need God in my life. I need to have that forgiveness, that restoration. And let me tell you right now, He is extending that hand of forgiveness. He's extending that hand of His joy and His love. And He's saying to you today, and He's asking you, if you have never accepted His Son as personal Savior today, never prayed in your heart, and never realized for yourself that you're a sinner, that you have made mistakes, that you have something that has been number one in your life, and right now God is saying to you, give it up to me. Surrender it all to me. I want us to take the time in your own heart of hearts right now, if you have never made that decision to follow the Lord, just simply pray in your heart right now. Lord, I admit I'm a sinner. I admit that there's something else that's on the altar of my life and is getting between me and you. Lord, would you forgive me of my sin? Would you restore a right spirit within me? I believe in your Son, Jesus Christ, that He came to this earth, that He died. He died for my sins, and that cleansing blood has made me free from sin. And Lord, I believe and I put my faith and trust in Him today. Would you help me to live a life that is pleasing and honoring to you? If you prayed that prayer today, I want you to simply come out to me after the service and just simply say, Bruce, I want to know a little bit more about Jesus. I want to follow Him. I haven't followed Him in a long time. I know that there's other things that are coming between me and Him today, but I want a new start. I'd love to visit with you today about our relationship. Lord, for all of us today, I pray that you would focus our attention to keep us undistracted from the purpose that you have for us. And want us to follow you with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Lord, I pray you'll bless us as we all go our separate ways. And that from the bottom of our hearts that we will say that you are our strength, our shield. Let's sing together. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship.
you do for Thanksgiving?
Like